Hey there, it's Nathan Crane, founder of the Panacea Community and executive producer of Unify Fest, and I'm really grateful you're continuing to join us for the second annual Self-Reliance Summit. You know, this summit is really about empowering each of us to live closer to the land, develop new skills of self-reliance and interdependence, as well as live a more sustainable and harmonious life. And today on the summit, we have our dear friend and colleague, Marjory Wildcraft. Marjory is the founder of the Grow Network, which is the online home of a global network of people who produce their own food and medicine. Marjory was featured as an expert in sustainable living by National Geographic. She speaks at Mother Earth News festivals and is a regular guest on Coast to Coast AM. She was also a featured presenter in our documentary series, The Search for Sustainability. She's also an author of several books, but is best known for her video series, Grow Your Own Groceries, which has over 500,000 copies in use by homesteaders, foodies, preppers, universities, and missionary organizations around the world, as well as In My Own Home. I own a copy. I think it's a wonderful DVD to have. Marjory, thank you so much for being with us.
I'm so glad to be here, Nathan, and I want everybody who likes to eat to participate in this video session today.
Absolutely, and take notes because we're going to cover some really good practical stuff. Marjory is one of those people that really gets her hands out on the land and experiments and researches and tests and gets results. So this is really going to be a great interview. And today we're talking about homegrown food on every table. So Marjory, let's start at the best point in this conversation and ask you, what was the biggest mistake you made when you started growing your own food?
Well, I read the seed packets and it said, plant the seed and, I figured water it and come back in 90 days and come get your broccoli or your green beans. And I did that and my plants died. And I'm like, no, and I replanted and I tried a lot of things and nothing worked out for me. Long story short, spending a lot of time visiting organic farmers and very successful gardeners. The biggest difference, actually the most successful gardener was a guy down the road about a mile. His name was Brandon, and my broccoli had died, right? And his was just big and beautiful and like bursting with life. And I'm like, and a lot of times people who are really good at something actually can't tell you why.
Right.
But after a long time of figuring this out, what it really comes down to is the soil. And the biggest mistake, a lot of us just aren't in touch with how valuable soil is. I mean, we need dirt, right? Cheaper than dirt, right? Nobody thinks about it. But really good, vibrant soil is the biggest mistake I had was I didn't really realize how important that soil is. In fact, all land prices, if you go back to a century ago, in my little community here, if you look at land prices, the land that I live on was considered very, very inexpensive. They actually didn't think it was actually productive for much of anything, which it's very difficult to make it productive. A few miles away where the soil is rich and loamy, that land went for 10 to 20 times more per acre.
Wow.
Because people realized that because people used to produce things directly from the earth, and they knew what kind of earth would produce things, and it really comes from the soil.
It reminds me when I first started growing some of my own food. We lived in Vista, California, and built this raised bed garden in our small little yard, and went and got this composted horse manure. And the guy said, and I didn't really know much about growing food at all. He said, "Oh, this is amazing. Yeah, you can grow, great plants in this." And all right, cool. So I added it was like 50, he told me do 50-50, 50% regular soil and 50% this composted manure. And, we invested a lot of time. We had to drive like 50 miles to pick it up. We put in all the seeds, all the packets, watered it, and nothing came up. We had 0% success. And so I started doing a little research. Was like, no,
I know what the problem
that was way too much composted horse manure. The nitrogen just burned those seeds right up. Had no chance to come alive at all, So it's the soil. I mean, that was one of my first good lessons as well on, okay, it's all about the soil and not necessarily about getting exactly the composition perfectly right, But just knowing, if you have way too much nitrogen or not enough, minerals in it, for example.
I'll tell you another thing though about composted horse manure is horse quality hay is has to be mostly grasses. It can't have a lot of weeds in it. And in order to get horse quality hay, they put a lot of herbicides on the pastures.
Mm,
And so I've gotten composted horse manure that would not grow anything because
wow.
ultimately they had the hay that the horses had eaten, and it did not deteriorate in the horse's digestive system. You think, well, the picloram or whatever it is they use, the chemical, but it did not deteriorate, and it actually takes a while for those chemicals. So, and I've done the same thing with hay, of buying hay and putting it out on my garden as a mulch. It looked beautiful. First rain, when the chemicals that was on the hay could leach down into the soil, and like, oh no, there goes my potato crop. Like, So yeah, there's some things to be careful of for sure. There's a real simple test you can do to test if the soil that you're getting, or the compost you're getting, or the mulch that you're getting, or the hay is has any pesticides or herbicides in it. And it turns out that legumes, like black-eyed peas and peanuts and things, are real sensitive. And so you can do a simple test where you take that hay, for example, and put it in a bucket of water and store it around, and let it be in there for a day or two so that it can absorb it, and then water a small test plot of any kind of legume with this water from the bucket that you're testing with.
Mm-hmm.
And if you see those plants withering and dying or suffering, then you know that material is not good to use. Real simple test you can do.
Yeah, that's a good thing to have on hand, especially before you go get dump truck loads or pickup truck loads of whatever you're picking up.
Before you get those round bales.
Yes, exactly. Yeah,
Oh my God.
I mean, I pay here in Santa Fe. I pay, I think, $4 extra a bale for organic hay, but for my goats, they're walking around peeing and pooping all over the property, which is why the main reason we have them. And I don't want them putting chemicals all over my property when I'm,
Sure.
when I'm here growing organic food. It's like sometimes we have to think about even that part as well. A lot of people don't think about, that getting, I mean, that goes right into your soil, goes right into your plants, and then eventually right into your body.
And then right into you. Absolutely. On the flip side of that, so I'm a native from Florida. I'm a native Floridian, and I always thought that I was cold sensitive just because I never lived in a cold climate, right? What you grow up with is what you're kind of used to, and so I really was. I mean, if it gets to like the 70s, I'm kind of reaching for a jacket or a sweater, right? And I just thought that was the way it was. Well, after eating really, really nutritious food that I've grown in really good soils, those plants take up those minerals, and they, like broccoli is a cold, hardy plant. And eating a lot of those minerals over, a few years, I began to notice that, I was out, actually one day I was leading a group, and I was barefoot, and we just had like a light windbreaker on, and this group of people to do a tour, and there were people there with coats and jackets and boots, and they were freezing. And it dawned on me that, hey, my whole body and metabolism has changed from
Right.
eating good food.
Right.
Yeah.
Especially local too. I think there's a big part in that. I mean, I don't know how much science is done on it yet, but my theory is that when you eat local food that's adapted to your climate, to your region, and to your seasons, it's going to naturally adapt your body to that climate and region as well. I mean, it's just one of those things that when you start observing how
Absolutely.
nature works, those observations tend to be true when they are scientifically validated. But I wanted to ask you, so a lot of people tend to go and buy, like I used to, buy soil, buy compost, buy manure, etc. But isn't there a much better way to get your soil up to par? That's a lot easier, definitely for the lazier person, which is better for all of us anyway, because why do extra work when you don't have
Right.
to? And what I'm referring to is growing soil. So maybe you can talk a little bit about that. What's been your experience with growing soil? For people who don't know, how do you do it?
Well, I would say there's lots of different ways. And number one is just start composting. Of course, your kitchen scraps or the stuff you're getting out of the garden. I've got a couple of compost piles going, and I also have some small worm bins, and which we take the leachate, which is the water that comes from that, and then we apply that in the garden, which helps. But really, cover crops and animals, if you're going to be trying to do soil repair on a larger scale, those are the two ways. And a cover crop is the idea where you just plant something, like in the winter, I'll plant rye and oats and clover. And I'm not planting the oats to harvest them. I'm just planting them so that they'll grow there and get pretty tall, and I'll cut them down in the spring. And then all that organic matter and stuff is just going to compost naturally right there in the ground. The same with the clovers or other things. And then animals, as you're saying, I've got chicken tractors. I put ducks out there. You're talking about goats. And if they're managed properly, they'll eat the stuff, and then they are the biggest converters of plant material into nice fertility that you can imagine. They eat it and they poop, right? So the poop is really valuable. Got to be careful. You don't want to leave them on there too long, right? Because then you're just stripping the ground. But, careful rotation program. Cover cropping and animals are probably the fastest ways to build soil on a large scale. And on a smaller scale is going to be using your compost piles and making compost and adding it. I often think of things in that way. Like my garden beds are pretty intensive. And that's just soil that's rich soil that I've taken care of and that I continually develop. Then I also look at other areas which are large pasture areas for animals, for rabbits or ducks or geese or whatever I got going on, cows. So I look at it in two different ways. There's no way I would think about applying compost to acres of land.
Right.
But I regularly think about compost for my garden, which is small and intensive.
Right, exactly. And it tends to be really easy. I mean, for those who've never done it, the way that I do cover cropping in areas where, I want to build the soil fertility, which is everywhere, whether I'm planning to plant there or not. It's like I want the soil to be good anyway.
It is everywhere, right? Yeah.
I just lay down like a mix, just scatter the seed, and then I'll lay about, a half-inch layer of straw or hay on top. And, so so a little bit of light can come through, but it's still pretty well protected, and then just keep it damp for about a week and a half, and you'll see all that sprouts up. And you don't have to dig, you don't have to till, you don't have to you don't even have to bend over. You literally just scatter seed, throw hay, and keep it wet. And then all the, especially the legumes, the peas, the field peas, like you said, the clover, these things, the ones that are going to fix nitrogen into the soil, the ones that are going to dynamic accumulators. They're going to help pull up minerals from deep with the deep tap roots and bring it to the surface. All these things that nature has done for us forever, right? Why do we have to go and do so much extra work? We don't. When you learn some of these techniques, it's really quite simple, and you get a lot better results, and you're going to take care of your land better, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So, shifting the conversation a little bit, I want to talk about your experience with the Tarahumara.
Yeah.
They're such a fascinating people in Mexico.
They
I know some of them have been known to run upwards of 500 miles continuously. Very common for, long distance runs of 100, 200, 300, 400 miles. Fantastic book I read, Born to Run. You've probably
yes,
heard
my
of it.
favorite.
Yes,
Yeah.
amazing book. And you got to go down there and spend time with them. And what was your experience down there, and how was that related to their own food production and their lifestyle? What findings did you have?
Well, I went down there because a friend of mine really knows them real well. So I had a guide that had been going there 20 years and has in-depth relationships. And his name's Dave. And Dave told me that the Tarahumara, quite frankly, say that the reason they are the greatest ultramarathon runners in the world is because they grow their own food. I said, well, I got to go check that out, like I'm totally into growing my own food. So we went there, and the whole point of the whole trip was to learn how they grow their food, how they prepare their food. And it is true. The Tarahumara that are living on the land and that are still living, there's a group that live their complete ancestral lifestyle. I did not have access to them. They are like wild human beings, and But we had access to a bunch of them that were still living on the land and keeping their traditions alive. And it's absolutely true because just as soon as the Tarahumara go into town, they just lose it. They don't have the ability. And part of that is the lifestyle to grow your own food as you're getting a lot of exercise. But their recreation. I met this one guy. The other thing is longevity. It just amazed me. I met this one guy. He's like 75 years old. And I said, and he's out running. He's running. I'm like, whoa. I said, tell me, when was the last time you ran a race? Like, I'm kind of testing him out. Like, really? Are you the real deal? He goes, last week. He says, yeah, it was like a 70-kilometer race. I said, really? I said, you're how old, And he said, 75, whatever it was, 74. And I'm like, wow, I hope that I'm in as good a shape as you are. And everybody started laughing. They said, you won't be. Like, this guy was so, his body he was ripped, like he was gorgeous at 74, right? But really they eat really, what they grow. They don't have any GMOs or any junk food. They couldn't afford a hamburger. And you'd say, well, they're really poor, but they were incredibly wealthy, in my opinion. Right. Herds of cattle, flocks of chicken, flowing water, good soil, big families that loved each other and supported each other and grew their food together and laughed together, had birthdays together, had weddings together, funerals together, community, other neighbors that were doing the same thing. They were wealthy, although, did they have $10? No. But, it was a beautiful, beautiful trip. Wow. I had so much fun. Really kindred spirits.
Yeah, I would love to go down there. Actually, I might next year. I got invited by one of the guys who had brought them here to do some of the races here in the United States a number of years back. So I may go out there. I think it's fascinating that there's still people today that are living in harmony with the planet, and it shows. From what I understand, it's very common for the Tarahumara, who are still living close to land, growing their own food, to be running like that well into their 80s.
Yeah. Even older.
Most of my friends that are, in their 60s, talk to them about running, and it's like they couldn't even imagine going outside and running. So many aches, so many pains, so many problems, so many issues in the body. In America, we have people in their 60s, unfortunately, that are kind of like, they feel like they're at the tail end of their life, Whereas there, it's like people in their 80s are still thriving, even in the 90s. And I agree. I think a huge part of that is, removal from so many toxins and pollutants, removal from the sedentary lifestyle of sitting and doing, sitting in a chair all day long and actually being active, and then growing your own food, which is chemical free. It's organic. It's in good soil. It's filled with minerals. Imagine if we start doing that here in this country, how the health would change in all of the people here in America. It would just be so amazing, and all over the world, really. It's just that gives me hope of what they're doing. I'm so glad you went down there and spent time with them.
I imagine it every day. Homegrown food on every table. That's what we do.
So in your experience, what are some of the easiest food sources for people to grow?
Yeah, well, you may already have a whole bunch of wild food right now around you. In the Southwest, mesquite beans, but throughout much of the rest of North America is acorns. They're super easy to grow, really easy to process, pretty easy to collect. But then when you start getting into actually what you're raising for yourself, people find this pretty surprising, and some people find it a little upsetting, but animal products are really the easiest food sources to grow. And if you think about it, just having a small flock of chickens in your backyard, collecting those eggs every day, all you have to do is feed them and make sure there's a little bit of water and that they have adequate protection. And to give you the comparison, for plants, I need to bring the water to them, and I need to constantly be checking if they've got enough water or too much. I need to bring the food to them. I need to bring their fertility and the compost and whatever minerals they need. I need to protect them if it gets too cold. I've got to cover them. If it gets too hot, I got to shade them. Plants, they're in one place. And I love gardening. I think you should have a diversity of sources of food. But quite frankly, it's a lot of work. If I've got a flock of, chickens or semi-free-range chickens in my backyard, well, When it gets hot, they just go in the shade. You know, when it gets cold, they go out in the sun. You know, I don't have to do anything there. I just have a little automatic water system. And by the way, if anybody wants, we have plans for making a really simple gravity-fed watering system for small livestock over at the library at thegrownetwork.com. You can pick it up. It's free. Just click on the library and you'll get it. But a little simple watering system that all I really need to do is make sure that it has water in it, which, you know, maybe only needs attention once a week. So, and then feeding the chickens, really, they're out checking around bugs and scratching around. You know, maybe I have a little feeder set up where they can get free access to some grain, but it's not a lot of work, right? It's much, much easier than raising vegetables or even taking care of fruit trees. So meat and animal products really are easier to grow than vegetables. But those are some simple ones. You know, sprouts. That's another super simple. You know, growing sprouts, real easy to do. You don't need any land at all, just a windowsill. You don't even really need that. There's a lot of things you can do.
I was talking with, in one of the interviews we did here on the summit, we talked a little bit on sprouts, and actually, I think it was with Mike, actually, we talked about when you're doing sprouts, and I encourage everyone to go listen to that interview with Mike Adams. It was actually really fascinating. I'll just share briefly. When you're growing sprouts, add a mineral like water complex to your sprouts so that they're getting those extra minerals as well, because you're getting a ton of chlorophyll and phytonutrients from the sprout. I mean, and protein and, you know, really great nutrients for your body, but they're not necessarily getting the minerals they would from a really healthy soil. So adding in, you know, a kind of mineral complex that's already
seaweed,
yeah, something that's you're gonna get even more health from your sprouts. But yeah, sprouts are so easy. You just, you know, do it in your kitchen, your windowsill, wherever, in a dark room to start them. You know, they're super easy. Yeah, yeah, good. And plants. What are some of the easiest plants you found to grow?
Well, I prefer things that have a big seed. Just makes life easier, especially if you're going to start from seed. The National Gardening Association does a survey every few years and asks people, and every year tomatoes, tomatoes, they're always the number one plant that everybody loves to grow, and for good reason. You know, I mean, we can use tomatoes in a zillion different recipes, and they're pretty easy to grow, really. They're pretty hardy, you know, they're pretty good plants. So, but beans are another really simple one. Green beans are real simple. You know, it depends on the season. So those are going to be in your warm season, which we're heading into now. And then your cool season plants, you're going to go with your broccolis or your lettuce or your kales or your spinach. And really, most of them are not that hard. They're all pretty easy to do and just so enjoyable. I find that kids will eat stuff out of the garden that they would never eat from the grocery store. And if you know, I mean, when you start eating out of your own garden, you are not going to believe that you used to think the pasty, dead, flavorless, colorless stuff in the grocery store was food. And you'll know why your kids will eat it, but they definitely will, especially lettuces and things you'd be surprised about. So, yeah, lots of great things that can happen. And it's not that hard. It really is pretty easy.
Yeah. So what are some of the when I was out visiting at your place, you had all kinds of different food system set up for small areas. What are some of the systems you found that are working really well for you?
Well, there's also a report, by the way, in the Grow Network library called "How Much Land Do You Need?", where we go over a comparison of how much would be the minimal amount of land you would need to grow all the food you wanted for your family. But I'll give you a couple of the key points of that. One is the biointensive gardening method is the most efficient gardening method, and I'd recommend, and it's also the most time efficient and space efficient. So I'd really recommend looking into that. We also have an aquaponics system that we're testing out. We also are testing out hugelkultur systems to see, you know, what's going to be. Really, we're all trying to find the easiest and fastest and simple ways, because who's got time, right? Nobody has time, and especially with smartphones, people have less time. So
Right.
that's a whole nother conversation. And so I'm always, and I travel a lot and I present. So every system that we work on, we are trying to figure out how to do that. I have come up with a presentation called How to Grow Half of Your Own Food in Your Backyard in Less Than an Hour a Day. And that involves a real simple system with chickens and rabbits and a small vegetable garden. We don't have time to get into that now, but that is a present. I'm going to think about where that presentation is, and I'll find it. I'll see if I can get you a link to give everybody to share it.
Okay. That's also on your DVD too, right? Grow Your Own Groceries.
The Grow Your Own Groceries DVD is another. It's like drinking from the fire hose, but when you get done watching that, you will have gained a couple of years of experience.
Mm-hmm.
Like you will have ramped up your skills and knowledge that would have saved you several years of time. It really is designed to teach you the principles, no matter where you live. There are some real basic principles, just like we were talking about earlier, the soil, how important the soil is, or different aspects about watering. What is the easiest food sources to grow? How to do home butchering. It's, some people are freaked out about it, but it's actually a pretty simple and beautiful process. So that's what the DVD is all about. Definitely get you up to speed quickly.
And I do want to mention, I know we have a lot of vegan and vegetarian people in our community watching this, and my wife and I and our family, we've been plant-based for, I don't know, 5-6 years. I don't really keep track anymore, but some of the plants you can grow that are really high in protein, really easy to grow, store for a long time, and are a full, complete protein source is rice and beans. I mean,
For sure.
they're things that are easy. I've been making after I got back from Costa Rica, because everything over there is rice and beans. It's like got back from Costa Rica. It's like I've been making rice and beans, 2-3 times a week, and making all different kinds of dishes. Also quinoa. Is a great substitute for rice, and then
Corn.
the corn, beans, and squash. I mean, the three
Corn,
sisters.
beans, and squash
Squash has massive amount of calories, very filling, very nutritious. The corn as well, the beans as well. So I mean, these are other, for people who are strictly plant-based diet. These are simple things you can grow that will provide a massive amount of the food that you need, and then supplement that with fruit and other vegetables, so.
Yep, for sure. Corn is actually one of the easiest grains to grow. It's really one of the easiest. It's easy to harvest, easy to process, easy to grow. A lot simpler than wheat or some of the others. But I love it. I always have a corn patch.
Mm-hmm.
Corn is a plant that also will communicate with you really, really well. If you're interested in working with nature spirits directly,
mm-hmm.
She is very, very communicative. I mean, I can go in a corn patch and immediately, sink in with the plants, and it's a beautiful experience to be in your corn patch and coming into communication with them. But the corn plant, especially, the way we've developed, it has such a long-standing relationship with humans that it cannot survive without human beings. So there's a very close symbiotic relationship, and I think that's one of the reasons it's much more communicative than other plants. It's a good one to grow.
Interesting. Very interesting. I'd never heard that. It can't survive without humans.
No, it can't. It's sacrificed most of its natural defenses and put all of its efforts into growing that ginormous ear
mm-hmm.
for you.
Right.
And and it depends on you to collect its seed and save it and plant it again.
Right.
And
interesting.
But you are also dependent on it for that gigantic ear for your calories and your protein and your minerals. So
right.
Yeah.
Now, what about what's been your experience with community and relationship to growing food? How have you found that to be, important, supportive, ways that working in a community can actually help you be more self-reliant? Because a lot of people, we talk about self-reliant, and you get kind of, in the prepper movement, it's kind of like, I want to be away from everybody, off on my own. But when I think of self-reliance, I think of it as building personal skills so that, I have something to offer a community. So because in a community, you can do 10 times more with half or quarter of the work that you would do by yourself, right?
Yeah, that's the biggest myth of the whole self-reliance or survivalist community. That's the biggest myth of that whole genre, is that you can do it alone, and you can't.
Right.
You really can't. And I'll
Tough.
give you one simple example. And really it's genetics. Like, you've got a flock of, let's say it's just tomatoes, for example.
Mm-hmm.
You got a crop of tomatoes. You've always got a crop of tomatoes going. Well, really, in order to have vibrancy in the genetic pool, you really need to have about 20 to or more, 40 tomato plants in order to maintain the diversity that you need to, we've all heard about, and we've got inbreeding jokes about people from certain parts of the Americas. We won't go into that, but you do have to have, and the way you do that is you have neighbors that are growing it. And really, it's that simple. If you were going to have chickens, for example, for eggs, somebody's got to have another rooster. You got to keep the genetics going. You have to have a gene pool that's big enough. Squash, another great example. I love squash. I usually try to grow 2 or 3 types of squash, and you can't really grow that many more because they cross-pollinate real quickly. Whoops. And I'm going to turn that off.
Right.
So they cross-pollinate really quickly. So I depend on some neighbors that live a mile or 2 away to grow some different varieties of squash, and then we trade back and forth. But you really need to have that level of community going on with the different people growing just to keep a gene pool alive and vibrant.
That it makes so much sense, especially when we think about like the honeybee, for example. A lot of what they're doing with the queens now in a honeybee colony is, inseminating the queen with just one kind of bee, because they're trying to create, an exact, we only want this one, we don't want the diversity. And yet, we're still seeing colony collapse disorder. We're still seeing, bees leaving hives. We're still seeing more infections in beehives than ever before, and more prone to disease and mites and things like that. Whereas how they naturally do it, when a queen, goes on her mating flight, she might be, impregnated, if you will, by maybe a dozen different bees, and often different kinds of bees that have different genetics, different types of honeybees. And, that's important that diversity is there. And the other thing that is important to note, same thing when growing our food. If you're just growing one monocrop, right, one monoculture of the same thing, you're going to be so much more prone to disease, to, insect attacks. So whereas if you have diversity in what you're growing, you have, diversity of trees, you have a diversity of ground cover, you have a diversity of vegetables, all in the same vicinity, they're going to support each other. What's fascinating too is about the fungi network, right? The communication of the fungi in the soil, and how it communicates, to the plants, and the plants can tell each other, oh, we've got this, this disease coming, for example, or this pest coming, and they actually will produce chemicals that will help to protect them against it because of that kind of neural network in the soil. I think that's just so awesome. So, what are your top 3 tips for people wanting to really get going on growing their own food?
Well, we talked about one of them. So one is really make sure that you've got some good soil. That's definitely number 1. And 2 is start some sort of composting regimen, because you're going to want to continually be working on the fertility of that soil. A lot of people think, oh, I'm growing it in the soil and it's good, I'll just be able to keep planting forever. No, you got to keep giving back and regenerating. And the third thing, and I know that this is going to be a little bit different, is start getting a journal and start taking down notes. When I first started on this, I took a homesteading workshop years ago with this older gentleman who was really been growing his own food for most of his whole life, and it's a 3-day workshop. And the very first morning, he goes, I'm going to give you something that is going to vastly improve your ability to grow food over the long term. He said, and if you use this regularly, you will improve in years what would normally take decades. And we're all like, so exciting. And he gets out this box, right? And he opens up this box, and out of this box, he pulls out a whole bunch of $1.69 clipboards. And he hands each one of us a clipboard, and he says, start taking down notes. And he is so right. It's just really, what did I, I have been astonished at how many times I planted a tree in a spot. Like you think, oh, I'm going to remember that. That's a tree. I planted it. I bought it, right? And I come back, 6 months or a year later, and I'm like, what is that tree? Does anybody remember what that is? Okay, I can see it's an apple tree. I get from the leaves in the flower. Does anybody remember what variety? But really, seriously, and often just snapping photographs regularly, like 2 or 3 weeks later, you have some sort of bug infestation. You go back and look at your photographs, and maybe it wasn't even something you were taking the picture of, but because now we have such high density, the high quality, you go, oh wow, I noticed over there that the leaves were actually turning a little bit brown, and I might not have watered it enough. And it helps to give you continuity, but knowing writing down and journaling. So the 3 tips are: 1, really work on your soil; 2, start working on your compost so that you've got to rebuild your soil; and 3 is start journaling and keeping track of what you're doing. And the failures are especially important. You don't have to tell anyone, but they're really important.
Right, because they teach you not what to do. So don't do that again, right? You need to change it up a little bit.
Yeah. In fact, the video set that I have, what, of all the feedback I got from it, and really everybody loves it, but the biggest feedback is we are so grateful for all the failures you showed us. I'm like, oh God, couldn't you have liked me for some other reason? Like all the stupid mistakes. And I went ahead and put them in there. But people are like, oh, I'm so glad you showed that because I was going to do the same thing. I'm like, okay.
Right. You save people a lot of time, and you save yourself a lot of time. I love the journaling thing. I've done a little bit, but I'm going to start doing it more because especially as I start planting a lot more and experimenting more, like with hugelkulturs and terraces and things like that. It's good to know, like I'm paying attention now, like which trees, for example, we planted are, blooming early and going to get affected by the late frost. Whereas which ones are not blooming yet, and they're probably going to produce fruit. Just really paying attention. But as we get more and more and more in, it's hard to remember all that. So obviously, journaling is such a great idea. Yeah, thank you for those tips. I think that's very valuable. As we kind of wrap out here, I want to share a few websites. We'll put Marjory's website below this video. It's thegrownetwork.com. Click on that. Check out the library she talked about, the gravity-fed water system, the report on how much land you need for how much food you want to grow. And there's a lot more there as well. Also her DVDs at Grow Your Own Groceries. We'll put all the links right below this video, so take a look at that. Also, if you missed any of the other interviews during the summit and during the free replay period, you can own them. We have them available as an upgrade option. Click the upgrade button on this page. It'll give you all the details. That helps us to continue this work that we love doing and bringing you this information. And you can own the whole series plus extra bonuses, and you'll be able to listen and watch as many times as you want. And finally, I want to invite you out to Unify Fest. Unify Fest is a 4-day sustainability festival here in Santa Fe in September. And there's hands-on workshops, there's training in permaculture, there's learning how to make your own medicine, there is building out of natural building materials, there is wild foraging, as well as a lot of great other things with wonderful live music, yoga, tai chi, qigong, movement classes, a lot of ceremony, sacred indigenous ceremony from indigenous elders that are coming all over the world. And it's just an awesome time with a great community of people that care about the land and care about humanity. So check that out, unifyfest.com. I'll put a link below this video as well. And other than that, Marjory, it's been wonderful spending time with you. Thank you for all the work you do. I mean, I love what you put out at the Grow Network. I know you guys just put out such good quality information. And I know the Tarahumara, you put out a lot of good information about your experience there as well.
Oh, there's a whole sequence on that if anybody wants to read, it's really fun. It's kind of a cliffhanger with lots of plot twists.
Exactly, and it was really good. I mean, the Grow Network is such a wonderful thing you put together. So thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Nathan. Y'all have a good day.
All
Grow
right.
something.
Take care, everybody. We'll talk to you next time at the Self-Reliance Summit. Be well.